Some years ago, I had a conversation with a layman about flying saucers. And because I'm scientific, I said, and I'm being sarcastic, you understand, I said, I don't think there are flying saucers. Well, my antagonist immediately jumped on me and said, is it impossible that there are flying saucers? Can you prove that it's impossible? And I said, no, I can't prove it's impossible. It's just very unlikely. And then he said something very interesting. He said, you are very unscientific. If you can't prove it's impossible, then how can you say that it's unlikely? Now, this is a perfect example of a confusion about what science actually is. This is exactly backwards from how science works. Let me explain this carefully because it's important. Science is not about proving what is possible and what is impossible. Science is about saying what is more likely and what is less likely, based on our observations of the world and our knowledge of how things work. That's what science is. It's not about absolute proofs of possibility or impossibility. That's almost philosophy, not science. In science, we're constantly making estimates of probability. We say, given what I know about the world, this is more likely than that. And we never, ever prove that anything is impossible in an absolute sense. Let me give you an example. I could ask myself, is it impossible that I could walk through this wall right now? Well, technically, from quantum mechanics, there's a tiny, tiny probability. A probability so small that you could express it with more zeros than there are atoms in the universe. But technically, it's not zero. So can I prove it's impossible? No, I can't. But is it reasonable to say, given everything I know about physics and walls and the world, that it's fantastically unlikely? Absolutely. And that's science. Now, when it comes to flying saucers and extraterrestrial visitors coming to Earth, I need to think about the same kind of question. Not is it impossible, but given everything I know, what is likely and what is unlikely? And to answer that, I need to think about several things. First, let me think about the distances involved. You see, the nearest star system to us is Proxima Centauri, and it's about 4.25 light years away. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? There's a spacecraft that we humans built called the Parker Solar Probe, and it's the fastest object we've ever made. It travels at about 692,000 kilometers per hour. It's incredibly fast, and at that speed, to reach the nearest star, it would take 6,600 years. 6,600 years. If you had left Earth when the ancient Egyptians were building the pyramids, you still wouldn't be there yet. Now, someone might say, well, but maybe they have better technology than we do. Maybe they can go faster. And that's true, they might. But here's where physics comes in, and this is not a limitation of our engineering. This is a limitation of the universe itself. Nothing with mass can reach the speed of light. It's not that we haven't figured out how to make engines powerful enough. It's that the laws of physics forbid it. As an object gets closer and closer to the speed of light, it requires more and more energy to go faster. To actually reach light speed with any mass would require infinite energy, literally infinite. And that's not an engineering challenge. That's a structural limit of reality itself. So even if aliens are incredibly advanced, much more advanced than we are, they still can't overcome this limitation. They can't do it because it's not that they haven't tried hard enough. It's that the universe doesn't allow it. So the distances between stars are enormous, and crossing them takes an incredibly long time, no matter what technology you have. But wait, there's more to think about. Let me think about what we actually observe when people report UFOs. When someone sees something in the sky that they can't immediately identify, they call it a UFO, unidentified flying object. Now, unidentified just means we don't know what it is. It doesn't mean it's from outer space. It means we don't have enough information to identify it. And there are lots of things in the sky. There are airplanes, there are helicopters, there are weather balloons, there are satellites, many satellites. There are meteors, fireballs, clouds, and various atmospheric phenomena. You know, there's a famous case from 1967. Police officers in 11 counties in Georgia spent days chasing a UFO. They were absolutely convinced they were seeing something extraordinary. They followed it all night long. And do you know what it turned out to be? Venus. Just Venus. The planet Venus. But it was very bright that night, and they weren't familiar with how it looks in the sky, so they thought they were chasing a spacecraft. Now, this is very instructive. These were trained police officers. They were disciplined, observant people, and they reported something they genuinely did not understand. But when we look at the facts, it wasn't aliens. It was a planet that they were unfamiliar with. This happens all the time. People see things and they don't understand what they are, so they assume something exotic. I have a friend who studied UFO reports very carefully for many years. His name is Mick West, and he looked at hundreds of these cases. He studied government reports. He studied eyewitness accounts, and what he found was very interesting. Most cases, when you look at them carefully and get good data, can be explained by conventional things. Airplanes at odd angles, atmospheric phenomena, reflections of light, meteors, weather balloons, reflections of satellites. When you look at the data carefully, most cases have mundane explanations. But let me be very careful here. I'm not saying it's impossible that some cases might be something else. I'm saying that when we examine the data carefully, it turns out that the simpler explanations are almost always the correct ones. This is something called Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation that fits the evidence is usually the right one. And in almost every case where we have good data, the simple explanation, it's Venus, it's an airplane, it's a satellite, it's an atmospheric phenomenon, those explanations fit perfectly. Now, here's something else I want to think about. If extraterrestrials were actually visiting Earth, what kind of evidence would we have? Think about this carefully. We would expect to have physical evidence. We would expect to have artifacts that we could study. We would expect to have photographs, really clear, unambiguous photographs that no one could deny. We would expect to have documented encounters that could be verified and replicated. When I look at the actual evidence that exists for UFO visitations, what do I see? I see blurry photographs. I see stories passed from person to person. I see eyewitness accounts that are vague and often contradictory. I see reports of things that people don't understand. But I don't see anything that, when examined carefully, is inconsistent with conventional explanations. You know, it's interesting. The government released a report recently, in 2021. They looked at 144 unidentified aerial phenomena reported by U.S. government sources since 2004. And what did they conclude? They said that most of these phenomena, if they were to be investigated thoroughly with good data, would probably turn out to be conventional things. They said unidentified just means we don't have enough information, and that UAPs probably lack a single explanation, meaning sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's another, but they're all mundane. Now, I want to think about something else, something very important. Let me imagine that extraterrestrials really did make it here from some distant star system. Think about what that would mean. It means they solved all the engineering problems of interstellar travel. It means they can build spacecraft that can survive the journey. They have the energy source, the navigation systems, the life support systems. They've solved incredibly difficult technological problems. And then, when they get here, what do? Do they land on the White House lawn? Do they arrange a formal meeting with world leaders? Do they broadcast a message to all of humanity? No. Instead, according to the stories, they sneak around in the dark. They create mysterious lights in the sky that people sometimes see. They apparently zipped around in the 1950s and then they stopped coming. Or maybe they're still coming, but only showing themselves to people in remote areas in ambiguous ways. Now, this seems very strange to me. If you had the technology to build a spacecraft that could cross interstellar space, wouldn't you be able to decide how to make first contact? Wouldn't you be able to control what the people on this planet could see and understand? It seems very odd that such advanced beings would, apparently, be remarkably bad at making themselves clearly known. Here's another way to think about it. We humans have various spacecraft in orbit around Earth and traveling through space. People can track them. We know where they are. People can take photographs of them. Astronomers can see them. And these are visible, trackable objects. Now, if extraterrestrials came to Earth, they would presumably have spacecraft too. And if they're in our airspace, shouldn't we be able to detect them with radar? Shouldn't we be able to track them? Shouldn't they have collided with something? Shouldn't we have wreckage? But we don't have any of these things. We have mysterious lights in the sky. We have stories. We have eyewitness accounts. But we don't have the kind of hard physical evidence that we would expect from a spacecraft, whether it's from Earth or from somewhere else. Now, let me think about what we do know about the people who report UFOs. People are prone to misidentification. People are prone to misremembering. People are prone to being excited and jumping to conclusions. Human perception is not perfect. Our memories are not like video recorders that perfectly capture what happens. We interpret what we see. We fill in gaps. We jump to conclusions. I'll give you another example. There was a whole period in the 1950s when people were reporting flying saucers constantly. But you know what was happening? The government was testing new aircraft, experimental aircraft with unusual shapes and capabilities. And people were seeing these aircraft and not understanding what they were. So they assumed they were alien spacecraft. But they weren't. They were just aircraft that the government was testing secretly. This is very important. Our own government's secret aircraft and secret weapon systems can explain a lot of UFO sightings. We create things that people don't understand. We test things in the sky that look bizarre. And people see them and think they must be extraterrestrial. But they're terrestrial. They're from Earth, just classified or experimental. You know, I was once asked a very important question about this. Someone said to me, "But Feynman, how do you explain the fact that so many people have seen UFOs? Doesn't that prove something?" And I said, "No, here's why. Throughout history, many people have seen many things that weren't real. Many people have seen ghosts. Many people have seen miracles. Many people have seen all sorts of things that, when investigated carefully, turned out to be misidentifications or misunderstandings. Just because many people report something doesn't mean it happened the way they think it happened. It means that many people had experiences that they interpreted as UFOs. But interpreting something as a UFO is not the same as proving that it was a spacecraft from outer space. These are very different things. Let me think about one more aspect of this, and it's crucial. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that extraterrestrials exist somewhere in the universe. And let's say they've achieved spaceflight. Does that mean they visited Earth? No. These are two separate questions. First, does intelligent life exist elsewhere in the universe? I think, given the size of the universe and the number of stars and planets, it's actually quite likely that life exists elsewhere. Life emerged here on Earth, in this little corner of the universe. The universe is vast, almost unimaginably vast. It would be strange if life only happened once, in one place. So I think intelligent life probably exists somewhere out there. But second, have they visited Earth? That's a completely different question. For them to visit Earth, they would need to overcome those enormous distance problems I talked about. They would need technology that we can barely imagine. They would need to survive the journey. And they would need a reason to come here. They would need to decide that it's worth the effort and the risk to visit this particular planet. And I have to tell you, from my knowledge of the world that I see around me, I think it is much more likely that the reports of flying saucers, the stories, the sightings, the accounts, are the results of the known, very well understood irrationality and misunderstanding that is characteristic of human beings on Earth than they are the results of unknown rational efforts of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. Let me say that again because it's important. I think it's much more likely that we're misunderstanding what we're seeing, that we're misremembering, that we're getting confused, all very human things, than it is that extraterrestrials have somehow solved the nearly impossible problem of interstellar travel and are sneaking around our planet in a way that creates ambiguous, easily misinterpreted reports. Now, some people will say to me, "But you're being closed-minded. You're saying it's impossible." And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's unlikely. There's a difference, and that difference is crucial. I'm being as open-minded as I can be. I'm not claiming absolute knowledge. I'm saying that based on evidence and probability and what we know about physics and about human perception, the most reasonable conclusion is that UFO reports are not evidence of extraterrestrial visitations. But you know what I love about this question? It's that it gets people thinking about science. It gets people thinking about evidence and probability. It gets people wondering about the universe. And those are good things. Even though I don't think UFOs are real spacecraft, I think it's wonderful that people are looking at the sky and wondering. I think it's wonderful that people want to know if we're alone in the universe. Actually, let me close with something that I think is really important. This whole question about UFOs and extraterrestrials points to something deeper. It points to the fact that we are very curious creatures. We want to know if we're alone. We want to find evidence of other life, other intelligence, other civilizations. And that's beautiful. That's a wonderful human instinct. But we should satisfy that curiosity with careful observation and rigorous thinking, not with wild speculation and wishful thinking. If we want to detect extraterrestrial life, we should use our best scientific methods. We should use radio astronomy. We should look for signals. We should study the universe carefully. We should think about how civilizations might communicate across the vast distances of space. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find something. Maybe we'll detect a signal. Maybe we'll find evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. But until we do, until we have clear, repeatable evidence, we should be honest about what we know and what we don't know. And that honesty, that careful thinking, that refusal to jump to conclusions, that's what science is. That's how we learn about the world. That's how we get closer to the truth. So I'm not saying don't wonder. Don't ever stop wondering. But do your wondering carefully. Do it scientifically. Look at the evidence. Think about probabilities. Consider the simplest explanations first. Because in the end, the truth about the universe is far more interesting than any story we could make up. The truth about how big the universe is, how far apart the stars are, how difficult interstellar travel would be, how we're made of the same atoms that form stars. That's incredible. That's worth thinking about. And that's why I love science.